so happy to see you all here tonight. I opened Paul's debut novel, Tinkers, in 2011 as a first-year MFA student at the Iowa Writers' Workshop, where Paul also graduated and had returned to teach for a semester the previous year. Tinkers was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2010, and Paul's recent presence haunted the light-filled classrooms, copies of his slim, starkly beautiful book strewn on couches and dining tables. By all accounts, a humble but brilliant guy, a former indie rock band drummer, and a generous teacher. I was 22, craving books I hadn't yet discovered, where history felt alive as the present, sharp and fresh and strange. Books powered by associative and emotional logic, exquisite details and sentences. Tinkers was like nothing I'd read before, a world all its own, intricate, delicate, and musical, like the clocks its protagonist George repairs until his deathbed, where we meet him at the book's beginning. Paul once said in an interview, "I love finishing a book and thinking, I feel privileged to have read that. I feel dignified. I feel like that book thought of me as sacred, soul to soul. It was courteous to me, and it preserved my dignity. I want to write the kind of books that I most love to read." Paul's work is devotional to his influences: the Bible, Melville, Emerson, Morrison, Faulkner, Marilyn Robinson. He finds joy in this lineage, writing in the spirit of authors who have graced him. I finished Paul's book with the sense I had been dignified, trusted, and of homecoming to my own artistic lineage, which includes, of course, Paul. His books are a distillate, years of exploration and attention, thousands of pages rendered to 200 or so, as precise and as deep as possible. They read like blessings. I'm so grateful he's here with us on Fishers. Please join me in welcoming.
That's one of those introductions that I just feel like it's only going to be downhill from there. and also, if I could have a copy, I'm going to frame it and give it to my mother for Christmas. Thank you. Yes, I could just run off and start talking about all sorts of stuff. That's very inspirational. Shall I read a little bit?
You read a little bit, yeah, that
So,
sounds great.
We'll start off reading just a little bit from this book, This Other Eden, which came out a couple years ago. I don't think, we'll get into, if you don't know the background of the story, don't worry about it. It's kind of a hard book to pick stuff to read from, so this is just a brief little kind of set piece. I think all you need to know for this part of the program is that the setting is on an island off the southern coast of Maine, which is the home of a small racially integrated community, and there is a small school on the island that is run by a missionary, and this is just about one of the younger, the 15-year-old boy who lives on the island, who has some artistic talent, and so this is just a little bit of time spent with him. One of the things I love about reading in New England is my home. Sometimes these are very New England kind of. The settings are New England, and there's the Old Testament. It's very Protestant. And sometimes if I read this down in Miami, people are sort of like, "That's the snow and Moses," that kind of thing. So I feel like this is. I think the other thing I'll say too is that figures named Shem, Ham, and Japheth are mentioned, and they are Noah's sons. So, it begins. Matthew Diamond, who was the missionary / teacher on the island. Matthew Diamond noticed the little chalk drawings Ethan Honey made on his tablet. Ethan drew crickets and crabs and starfish, the apple on the bench and the biscuit on top of his tin, whatever was in view from his seat in the schoolroom during lessons. The drawings were very lifelike, and Matthew believed that Ethan had real talent. Matthew had been to New York once and Boston 3 times, he told Ethan, and he had seen galleries hung from floor to ceiling with the great paintings of Europe and America, and Ethan's drawings reminded him of many of the paintings he had seen that were called still lifes. Still lifes are paintings of things you find around the house or outside, usually arranged on a table in a pleasing way, in light that makes them seem, well, numinous, as we discussed last month during Bible, Matthew told Ethan. Sometimes they are a bouquet of flowers in a coffee pot on a stool outside the front door. Sometimes they are water in a green jelly glass, a pewter spoon, and a bowl of chestnuts on the bench next to the fire late in the evening. Sometimes they are seashells, a starfish, a piece of blue glass at sunrise. Anything at all that catches your eye and you find beautiful. And you have to think about how the light strikes them, what shadows the objects cast, what of the light passes through them and illuminates them from inside, what of the light is held inside the glass or translucent berry. Ethan liked to listen to Mr. Diamond make up those ideas for paintings. He could see them in his mind, could see their light moving through glass and water and reflecting off the blade of a knife. Ethan thought he could probably find all the things Mr. Diamond said on the island except grapes, which he knew were fruit but had never seen or tasted for himself. Ethan split wood and fetched water and went to school lessons, and afterward he took the pencil and sheet of white paper Mr. Diamond had given him and a flat board his father had found for him and walked to the little bluff facing the mainland. He reached into one of his shirt's breast pockets and took out a small, dull spoon and a medicine bottle made of blue glass. He arranged the spoon and bottle on a rounded step of the bare granite at the top of the bluff, worn and pitted by glaciers. From the other shirt pocket, he gently scooped a dead chickadee he had found by the schoolhouse that morning. The bird was sleek and unruffled, its claws curled and retracted against its body. It was impossible to tell how it had died. Ethan could not believe one of the island cats had not found it first and eaten it. The body had begun to smell in his pocket during school, faintly at first, but more it seemed as the morning went along. He laid the bird in front of the medicine bottle and spoon. The noon sun was brighter, more glaring and direct than he'd have liked. He found a stick from a scrub oak and wedged it into a seam in the granite and removed his shirt and draped it across the stick's branches, making an awning over the bottle, bird, and spoon. He sat on the granite and hunched over and began to draw, starting with the bird. At first, the outline of the bird floated, curled and dead in absolute white space. Then came the bottle and spoon, and the 3 objects rested on a common, invisible plane. Ethan sweated and became hot and distractedly wiped his face and the salty drops that ran down his forehead and hung suspended from the tip of his nose. Wind and surf reverberating against the rocks and through the trees, the noon sun unclouded and raining straight above, afternoon shores, his father and Grammy and his sisters and the island itself all dissolved into a single uninterrupted buzz as Ethan drew and found the lines and their weight with the pencil, pushing its tip or easing up, observing the lines darken or lighten, lend depth or define surfaces, render light bending through the bottle or a shiny little sun pooled in the bottom of the spoon's bowl, or still being collected in death inside the fine feathers of the chickadee's black hooded head, stored within them until the flesh they were fastened to perished and they swirled away over the rocks and off the bluff into the air, leaving only a frail little machine of bones. Ethan drew and imagined the earth after the flood, and Noah's sons and wives ranging across the plains and cragged hills, and wondered whether at first they found the bodies of the drowned everywhere they went, jammed under boulders, slung on the tops of trees, splayed on the plains, and what it must have smelled like, and the 2 vultures and 2 turkey buzzards from the ark taking up their given thrones on the jutting hip bones of the nearest corpses, and whether those first months after disembarking were spent piling the dead large and small into heaps, and burning them in pyres that consumed entire families and villages. The people intermingled in the thick braided columns of smoke that drifted up into the sky and across the land and settled back across it in a fine layer of ash in which all the seeds of the renewed world were sown and by which they were all quickened. I think that's the longest sentence in the book. And I get to the middle of it and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to stick that in. Ethan leaned closer and worked on the details of the little bird's mask and imagined dark Ham at dusk, exhausted from dragging bodies by their ankles and heaping them in piles to burn, angered at not having been able to resist looking at the faces of the dead and trying to guess what children belonged to what mothers, what husbands belonged to what wives, what beloved servants to what kind masters, loyal to and in love with every corpse, despite what his somber, sober, God-struck father had told him about their wickedness, and which he had and still wholly believed, as much as he missed the former world, standing by the radius of embers and bones left from the day's cremations, looking east across the plains and seeing the faint glow of fair Shem's blaze at the base of the foothills in the distance, then looking west and seeing the plated columns of smoke from coppery Japheth's fires rising near the sea, and missing both his brothers more sharply than he thought he'd ever have been able to imagine after having been shut up with them in that boat for so many weeks. Ethan wondered, had God spared those brothers the grim work of clearing the dead from the world? Had he made sure to rinse the lands of that first race of people, every one of them drained away with the receding waters into the bottoms of the oceans, where their myriad bones turned and settled in the profoundest depths, sifted and collected around the pilings of the earth? The island, the Honey's own ark, then, except that Noah's ark had come to rest on a mountain, and he and his family had scrambled down from the deck and dispersed across the world, across the Hellespont and Arabia, Egypt, and through all Africa, across the Mongolian plains and the American West, while the Honeys, that's his family, kept to their own island ark and left it as seldom as possible. When Noah and Japheth and Shem and Ham and their wives paraded down the gangplank onto dry land, herding moose and black bears, and setting loons and wood ducks free from their cages, there was not another single soul alive on the planet. It may as well have been another planet. Ethan drew and daydreamed about the Bible stories Mr. Diamond read to him and the other school children, and the afternoon passed and the sun burned his back and shoulders and neck. That evening he had to lie shirtless on his stomach in the grass while Grammy Honey spooned cold tea onto his inflamed back. Charlotte and Tabitha, those are his little sisters, sat on either side of him and fanned him with leafy maple branches they'd stripped from a sapling. Later, during sweat-soaked bouts of sleep, a nightmare tormented him that he was suffocating within a pile of burning bodies, struggling to turn face up so he could cry out over the clamor of the flaming pyre and booming surf to frowning Japheth that he was not drowned, that spared or forgotten he was not one of the drowned. Ethan took a fever in the night, and Grammy cooled him with a rag soaked in cold, weak tea. He muttered about Noah and dead families buried in common graves, and Grammy whispered to him, "Hush! Think of what a glorious month in heaven it must have been while it rained down here, all those people arriving, freed from all the evil their hearts had been set on since every one of them had been little kids." Early the next morning, Eha, who was Ethan's dad, rose from his sleep and looked at his sun-poisoned son sleeping on a pallet on the floor with his sisters. Ethan was awake and heard his father shifting himself and rising off his bed, the floorboards taking his weight, the one-room shack distributing his weight throughout its joints and beams. He opened his eyes, and the burns on his back seemed to flare afresh, like a bank of banked coals poked in the dark dawn. Chills swept over his back and shoulders and up his neck. Sweat popped from the pores of his face and brow and felt freezing for breaking over the hot skillet of his skin. Heat pulsed from his back. It felt as if his stomach might be sick, and he let out a quiet little sob. Eha made his way over and around the bodies of his youngest daughters, snoozing on their pallets, and knelt by his son. He placed a hand on Ethan's head and stroked the boy's hair with his thumb, Such a big, strong head, such thick hair, his mother's. Such a beautiful child. Just this past week, an infant in my arms, it seemed, a babe I could hold whole in this cupped hand. Ethan whimpered as if the effort of enduring the night were letting go beneath his father's touch. Iha felt the sun's heat radiating back out of his son's skin. Burned forearms, singed noses, sun-branded necks were nothing new to anyone on the island. Men, women, children were all well used to such scorchings from the sun, directly from above and from its reflection off the mirror of the Atlantic in which their tiny pebble of a home sloshed. Grammy had a repertoire of cures: cold tea, mint compress, macerated plantain weed. She munched leaves and spat the paste into her fingers and smeared it across the boy's back. Grammy's remedies had none of the salubrious comforts of the medicine on the mainland, no baths of cold fresh milk or poultices of oatmeal mixed with spring water, no slab of raw beefsteak plastered over a black eye. Her compounds were spare and vaporous, essences distilled, brewed, steeped, reduced, concentrated into drops and small thimblefuls by a medicine woman who herself mostly survived on pipe smoke, black tea, ocean air, and the word of God. She concocted salves salutary to lean lives lived on shallow soil and bare rock. So I think maybe that's it. Beach reading, I always say my next project is going to be a musical comedy.
I feel like I have to start out because it's just so distinct. It rings so much in my ears. You were a former, or still are, a musician. You played in in a rock band, and I think as I'm reading your work, I just hear the cadences and the rhythms like so clearly. And I wonder a couple questions about that. But first off, does it ever? How does the editorial process kind of relate to the onslaught of that rhythm? Like, I picture you at the keyboard kind of like hearing that tempo and the language just like meeting the tempo in almost like you're playing an instrument in the writing itself. But then in the editorial, I wonder, I know you're aiming for like further and further levels of precision. And I think in my own work, I've sometimes grappled with, there's this sort of rhythmic beauty that almost like dictates what comes out and has its own kind of like trance state deluge. Yeah. And then there's maybe in the precision, the beat gets altered a little bit, or, it culls and it winnows. And so I wonder, like, how do you keep those rhythms, or do you worry that you'll sacrifice them, or does it just all align back into the cadence, like,
yes,
out of your heart?
It's process, man, it's process. There is never, in at least the 3 books that I've published, there isn't a sentence that I haven't, I wouldn't say revised, but reread at least 200 times. Just because if you're working on a novel for years and years and years, part of the way that you learn what works and what doesn't is you just keep rereading it, and you become so intimate with it. And my ideal is sort of, I want every sentence to feel like you could take any sentence in the book and kind of pull on it, and it would tug on every other sentence in the book, like it's all of a piece. So in early drafting, though, it's very intuitive, and it does. It's part of my disposition. It's just like what I like to do. But the kind of musical version of it is just improvisation. And so when I'm sitting at a set of drums and I pick up the sticks, wherever the impulse comes from in the universe, I just start tapping it out and I start making rhythms up and I start exploring, And if you're a really good drummer, the ideal of the perfect drummer is a drummer who can play a different beat on each one of your 4 limbs at the same time. It's called independence. It's like, and so it's the same thing when I sit down and write. It's just when I'm sitting at a laptop keyboard or I write on Post-it notes or whatever. It's the same signal, it feels like, just inspiration or whatever you would call it, but rather than coming into the world as drums and rhythm, it comes into the world as English prose. And so a lot of times I know kind of what the tempo and what the number of beats is, what the time signature, the dynamics, the key even, like I'm listening for. I know all of that stuff before I know what the sentences are literally going to mean. But then because you write that way, and because I'm so it's very lyrical, very rhythmic, and it's I'm kind of a sucker for pastoral writing. That any type of writing that to which you're disposed, as an author, it comes with potential pitfalls that you have to know, and so that kind of writing, when it goes way wrong, it becomes moon, June, spoon, kind of just you get language drunk. You get drunk on like, look at the pretty Rococo language. So that's when the kind of precision comes in, where you have to think, okay, this actually has to mean something, though. This actually it can't just sound. It's one of the ways that I put it to my students is, there's a difference between something sounding poetic and being poetry. There's this difference between something that's pretty and something that's beautiful. And in my case, to me, one of the ways to prevent that from happening is you run all of that stuff through a character. So all of those things become a function of how the character is experiencing her world and his world, their world, situationally, so that it becomes it lends the gravity and weight of meaning, because it's a human experience. It's a human soul kind of having these experiences.
Yeah. I was really interested to hear how you talk about character and writing character. It almost seemed like it was almost began in the language, and then the language, like these things that leapt out to you in the idiosyncrasies and the idioms of the character, became the character for you. So you'd go like, oh, they described clouds that way. That has to be this character, And they would only do it that way. And so I'm wondering also with character, like, and with much of your work, it almost seems like it's founded in the language, not like you're trying to use the language to describe the character that you've already conceived of. Is that how it is?
Right, so the inside out.
Yeah.
And you're listening, you have to listen back. That's why, for me, even though I write these little, 200 pages long, it takes 10 years, which is, I think of it as like the poetic or aesthetic or literary equivalent of, like, that's about how long it takes to get to know another person that well. Right? And and so it's always kind of advance and retreat, and there is, one of probably my favorite character in this book, and she's kind of the matriarch of this family, and it took me a very long time to get. And I would say, "You said that, didn't you?" And she said, "I said no such thing." Something like that. Warmer, kind of. And it's just that kind of. It's establishing kind of intimacy with the characters and with their language, and that's what you start seeing is that certain character, this or that character will have a sort of set of like metaphors or analogies for the way they see the world and how they experience the world. And as you learn that, what I start to do is I start to say, well, she thinks of this or that situation in this kind of language or with this kind of color or sound. So then what I start doing is I start making sure that whatever that character's language is only shows up when that character is being represented, and it's not allowed into the rest of the book. So that it's if people who like, if you're into opera or they're called leitmotifs. Whenever Siegfried walks on stage, so it's a kind of it's a little cue, and so you understand. You'll start to fit that. You start to associate the character with certain verbiage, as it were.
I love that sense of like I think you described it as being the story's amanuensis or something. Is that
just taking dictation.
Yeah, where you're just listening and you're thinking, well, do I have it? Like, there's so much mystery and discovery in that, and sort of like ceding authority to like the page and what you can find on the page.
And that's certainly not the way that every writer writes. I mean, when you teach, you have to be very careful, because that's just the way that I love to. When I start off on writing a novel, I love to not have a compass. I love to not have any idea where I'm going, and just let words come and just sort of see what arrives on the page. If But for a lot of wonderful writers, if they felt like they had to write that way, they'd be plumbers. You know, because it's like, I don't know what is all that. But I do, I like to improvise, and I like to sort of see what the language gives me and what the characters give me. And I really do, I actually think of it as very explicitly like a big trap door in a floor, and I open it up and I climb down into the novel. And the minute that I close it, I am not allowed to make any presumptions about what I think I'm already going to see, or I don't go in and assign sentences to characters. So it's just, I think of myself as just shut up and listen and look and try to, and don't presume you already know. I think that has to do too with like 90% of the language we all use when we're just walking around is what they call habitual. Like you just need it because you don't want to get hit by a car, and you have to know, it's just, and how often when you're talking with friends or acquaintances, you say something and essentially what you do is nod at each other and you go, you know what I mean. And we do. But when you're writing, you can't do that because that kind of prefabricated language isn't fine enough to capture these characters that way,
Yeah. I'm thinking about the point of view sort of question where everybody has their own kind of, like their signature sound and their signature. And especially in this other Eden, to some extent also in Tinkers, less so in Enon, but it still happens. It seems like you really love the like slippery point of view that like there's an overarching sort of point of view perspective that's a little bit outside the Islanders, but then the text is just weaving through this mind and this other mind, without some of the traditional cues that a less trusting writer would embed in the text, so it's not like, and now we have Ihar is going to be, and like, so as you're reading it, I'll have these moments where I'm thinking like, oh, that's a different kid, he just switched gears, like something is new, and then I'll say, oh my god, this has to be Rabbit, or, there's like very distinct characters where suddenly I know we're in a new spot. But I wonder at those shifts, like, for you, is everything like, in the drafting process extremely deliberate for you? Do you have moments where you're like, who's here? Like sometimes. Seance, where you've switched into, how do you control that? Because I feel like it's really masterful to like.
Part of that is just, like Herman Melville called writing Moby Dick ditcher's work. Yeah. So a lot of it is just you get it wrong, and then you get it wrong, and then you get it wrong. But you get it wrong in a particular way. So, that won't work, and they try this, that won't quite work, and you're just always kind of calibrating. And I write in unit, like the passages that I write tend to be 2 or 3 or 4 pages long. So I spend a lot of time moving different passages around because I like to be, I love to use all sorts of different texts in my texts without being clever, and I don't want to be overly post this or clever that. I want to give my reader as much as possible, as clearly as possible, but also from different points of view. So I love to use people's like letters, correspondence, articles that are poorly written from a local newspaper, all sorts of different, and then kind of choreograph them so that what they do is they move the reader. So I think one way I think of it as, and this is what like writers always do, you have all these different kind of quasi analogies or metaphors, but one way I think of it is as if I'm curating all these different voices and I'm presenting them to you, or and when I'm thinking visually, I think of what I'm trying to do is get the narrative to almost be like I'm bringing the reader through a gallery, and you're turning a corner, and then there's a painting, and then you get and then you move around, and so just keep showing the reader this whatever world, whatever story, whatever characters from all sorts of different points of view. Because then, we try to, if each character has their own kind of idiom or milieu or palette or key, then what starts to get very complicated is when characters meet each other. Mm-hmm. And then those things synthesize, and you think, oh, how did they,
because you do have some like voices where I'm like, this is broader or above, or
but to me that's half the fun, is it's exploring that and experimenting with that and seeing what harmonies you get, what dissonances you get, that sort of thing. But also always just being and maybe this leads. One of the things I realized that I'm always trying to jump back from myself and catch myself at what things that I'm not thinking about. And one thing I realized is that the kind of things I'm writing about, there's no way that I could ever explain what's going on in these people's lives. Like who are we? Why are we here? What does it all mean? What is God? It's just like you can't explain that. And so I caught myself realizing, wait, I thought explanation was meaning. So if explanation isn't available to me, how do I get? And I realized it has to do with description and just describing what is it like, what is this like, what is this like, what is this like. And what I just found is that actually helped me figure out how to do all this stuff we're talking about, so that the reader can go through it any way that she likes without having to consent to what I think she should feel or sense. That idea of like, I never want to, it's the way when you were quoting the way that I feel when I've gone through a book that I loved and it respected me and just let me go through it. It trusted me. And I thought a lot about how do I just trust my reader? Just say, here, look at this, look what I found. I don't know what it means. To explain it would be to explain it away, or would be to reduce it. To try to make something that's rich enough for somebody whose taste, the books aren't for everybody, but people who like it, like the books, can go through them and just have their own experience of them, which is a little bit different than saying, hey man, it's whatever you want. It means whatever you want. The meaning is, it's spent a lot of time trying to make it so I take you through the book in a very precise way, but I never tell you what to think of it. I just show you things very precisely, but I don't ever tell you what to make of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the precision and just attention, paying as close attention to what's on the page, to what you're rendering. When you going back to the thought of, you say you write in these sort of sections and chunks and maybe you move them around a little bit. I am curious.
Endlessly.
Okay, because I've read I love this description. You said you put on the jeweler's loop, or is that how you say the magnifying glass to look at each sentence and sort of spend your days with the. You can really tell the sentences have been cared for. But I am curious about pulling back, and because the books, all of them, really operate on this associative logic, memory, emotion. There's not as much a linear order so that it sort of seems endlessly shuffleable in a way. I mean, there's a trajectory that brings you through the book, but I guess I'm wondering how hard is it to pull back from those minute, each comma mattering so much, and see those larger gestures and.
Well, and that's another thing that you're just spending years doing, which is. You spend the afternoon with the jeweler's loop, and I think of it as I'm obsessed with mechanical watches and clocks. My grandfather repaired and traded antique clocks. My first, So I think another metaphor I use is that I want the novel to be as precisely put together and as precise at what it's supposed to do as a good Swiss watch.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of the whole time.
So you spend all this time getting all this on this molecular level, but then what you have to do is you pull back and you say, so now what do I have on my hands? And you go, ooh, that language means so much that whenever I try to, even if I know exactly what I want to write or what I'm going to try to grab when I'm trying to write a sentence, even if I get exactly what I wanted, the sentence when it finally ends up on the page means at least twice what I consciously was going after. So there's this lovely, so what is the story I actually have on my hands? So a lot of it is just you pull back and you look at the big view, and then you go in for a middle view, and then you go back in and you go, okay, and then you pull back. So it's that kind of going in and out, that sort of thing. And just, because I think of, there's this passage and there's almost like a note, a certain musical note or a color, a visual image that will be the last note that's struck of a particular passage. How will that then interact if I put the first note of this passage there so that this is ringing in your ear and then the first note of the next passage? And you just spend, you go, oh, that sounds terrible, or that sounds a little too cutesy, and just making sure that, that you're trying to put it together. I should say too that, and I say this to my students all the time, but every time I write a sentence, I can hear hundreds of millions of people stampeding for the exit. And this is something that as a writer you just have to be realistic about, which is, it's the craziest thing, but the thing that I say to my students all the time is, don't write your books for the people who won't like them. Because, if you pull your punches, the people who would have thought that was the greatest novel I've ever read will be like, oh, it seems so promising, but he kind of held back, So as the people are, running for the exit, screaming, the 10 or 12 people who come down to the front row and say, what next? That's who you're writing for, partly, and because you have to realize, like, these books are not for everybody. It's just it's a matter of taste, at a certain point.
Yeah. I have a question about the editorial process with an outside voice, because that's sort of what you're talking to now, but it seems like everything is forged so deliberately with so much time, like every single word, you've kind of have, a decade-long relationship with these choices, and it's almost like you've given it over to the text and you trust the text and the process so inherently. Is it hard for you then to open things up to working with like an editor or an agent and have that outside perspective? Yeah.
Well, I'm not intractable. I'd like to think of myself as sure, but all that said, I spend as close to a decade or however long it takes me. I spend as long as I possibly can without showing my agent or my editor anything.
Yeah.
I try to make it so it's just like I make the book as close as I can get to. I feel like you could just put a cover on it and put it in the bookstore, because partly it's, I don't like people walking around in my house while I'm building it. It's like, so my agent would be like, Paul, do you have any pages? And I'm like hiding behind the rock, like, no, and I avoid them. And then finally they tree me, and here it is. Because inevitably, then other eyes get on it, and you hear outside voices, and it's great, and I totally trust my agent, and I totally trust my editor, and they trust me. So that's another thing it takes, over time. They say, just whatever, okay, I'll talk to you in 10 years. And then when they do, I just say, because the other thing too is that if somebody with a very, very strong editorial voice, very strong agent, gets in too early, I can't hear the book. I can't hear the characters, And so there's like, I hate that sister. I don't think she'd have a cat, or whatever, just like, but she has a cat. Sometimes you can hear that and go, what? How did I get that cat wrong? But it's a kind of dial, and I'm just lucky that like Elaine Mason at Norton, who I worked with this other Eden, she was just amazing. She just read it. She said, there's 3 things wrong. And I said, I know. And she just said, it's this. And I said, yep. And it's this, yep. And it's that. And that's what you're looking for, is somebody who
That's such a nice feeling.
has read the book that you want to write. And they go, the book that you want to write is not happening because of this, that. And then a great editor will just say, that scene, it's off. It's a little bit out of tune. And as if I've been working with the thing for 8 or 10 years, I'm like, I know, but it's going to be really hard to write that. But it's sort of like, and it's almost always the thing that's like the whole reason the book exists is that part that you haven't taken care of yet, because it's like the hardest thing. And you always think, how am I going to write it? And it's always just write it one word at a time. You don't have to know it ahead of time. You use the same process, which is just. Don't worry about the whole thing, just worry about what happens the next moment. Just really lucky where Elaine Mason will just say that chapter's weird. And I say, I know, and I'll come back 6 weeks later and say, here. And we just sort of go back and forth a little bit. And usually it's just, she'll say, I think you've been looking at it like this, and she'll just take my shoulders and she'll just say, what if you looked at it like that? And there it is. That's why, because certain things just resist you. And sometimes it's that beautiful, elegant, I love being surprised. I'll be working on something for these years, and these 2 characters, I'm like, oh, they hate each other like cat. And then when they realize, no, they're in love. I got it exactly wrong, and suddenly the whole thing opens up, and there it is for you. And so it's that kind of, you have to like that kind of thing a little bit, I think.
I feel like that's a beautiful spot to open it up to audience questions.
It makes you feel
It makes you feel like a rock star.
Sort of, thank you so much. It was amazing to hear you talk about your process. I know I heard through the grapevine that's not a word we're supposed to use anymore or something, but whatever.
that's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I was thinking when you were reading Ethan painting or drawing,
Yeah.
and the still life and the bird and the flat plane, it's sort of like you're seeing the creation of an artist, and you can see that he's turned on by figuring out new ways of creating, the still life. And I was wondering if you had that moment, if you can look back on when you were 15 or, I don't know, 20, whatever it was, 8. Did you have a moment when you knew you really were a writer or you wanted to be a writer?
I mean, I think like a lot of writers, I started off as an avid reader, and I love those they used to have those the commercials like in the 80s or something, like this is your brain on drugs. Like I was like, this is your brain on art.
Yeah.
And like what my favorite books did to my head, and so I got to the point where it's like just reading the book wasn't enough. I had to start talking back to my favorite books. That's what I feel like I'm in dialogue with all my favorite authors and all that sort of thing. But I think also like a lot of writers, I thought of myself as a writer for at least a decade before I started writing. I walk around being like, I'm kind of the writer in the family, but I haven't written anything. And then you actually try to do it, you're like, oh, that's a lot harder than I thought. But there definitely is that, and to this day, I still, kind of my formative kind of experiences were spent knocking around the North Shore of Boston, like, the Audubon sanctuaries where like Thoreau and Emerson and Emily Dickinson, or she was in Amherst, but, and just so being a young child and being in the woods during the summer and then during the autumn and then during the seasons. I mean, you're on an island, seasons on an island, the light in it, and just associating those, the temperatures, the light. Like one of the ways I often just say, what I'm still trying to do is just capture in words what I felt like when I was maybe 15 years old, and just the world was so cruel, and it was maybe like 4:25 on a November Thursday afternoon, and just that light, and it was so beautiful, and yet my heart ached so much, and that kind of like that you're just enthralled by just, it's very transcendentalist kind of stuff, but and just trying to kind of grab that, and so, and that's one of the conversations I had with my editors. She made me do some more stuff about him being, because she's like, you artists always want to write just about artists, and we're all sitting around waiting for a story. But that I like that idea of just like, if you have to look, that quality of refining and getting better and better and better at paying attention, And I love painting, and I always stop. I say, stop. What color is the sky? And it's like, it's not blue, Or what I just love painting and just like colors. And I think as a writer, a lot of times that's what you're doing too. Is you're just writing about stuff that you think is cool and you admire.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
You spend a long time on one novel,
and
I'm curious, do you have... Wow.
It's just going into the feed, the audio feed.
Do you work on more than one project at a time to give yourself a, looking out of the corner of the eye kind of idea, where you have like the soft eye and you're doing something else, and then you're like, oh, I figured the other one out?
Yeah.
Do you use that?
No. But that's because I can't. I mean, I have plenty of friends of whom I'm very jealous, because they'll say, I'm working on a novel, but I've got these 4 other short stories. And when the novel's driving me crazy, I just go look at a short story. And I'm like, I get an idea every 10 years. Like right now, I'm like, where's the next one coming? But that's also, but within, especially when it's early on, I'm trying to conjure it and try to invoke, everything that I find interesting, I just throw into the manuscripts. And I mean, like everything, like paintings that I like, I'm just I set scenes in paintings I like, music that I like, just everything. Scripts and scraps from Shakespeare and Toni Morrison, just throw it all in and let it all just simmer. It's like the big pot that's just simmering for years and years. And I think that's another reason why I use all sorts of different, I call them texts, but they're just like different genres of writing. So in this, there are, like I said, there's local newspaper articles, there are letters between characters, and then because these people were, because historically the people these characters are based on, they were evicted from the island. There's a lot of like really bad like official documentation, and so that's one of the things that keeps me interested. Is if I'm sick of hearing this character talk, I just go over and I love to write like terribly written local newspaper articles.
And those are all fictional.
Scolding,
Well, right?
I make it all
yeah.
up. When I was writing the novel Tinkers, it's all about somebody who repairs clocks. So I wrote fake excerpts from a fake 18th century repair manual for clocks, and I thought that's the Enlightenment. Like, welcome, fellows, to reason. Gears and the postmaster general or whatever, the watchmaker got, and so because then that was just a release. It was just fun to write in that kind of like overly kind of caricatured kind of thing, and everything eventually has to pull weight though, or bear weight. But I don't make stuff bear weight until late, because I want different registers. You can't, if you keep writing in the same tone, it gets turgid, so you want to keep refreshing the reader, kind of oxygenating the reader's new language and all that kind of stuff. So I do what you're talking about, but I do it internally to the novel.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm really intrigued by the idea that it takes 10 years for you to stew on this. So within those 10 years, though, the world is changing and you are changing.
Yeah.
So to what extent does the product actually reflect some of the changes that you're experiencing over that time, and then vice versa?
Yeah, that's really cool. So sometimes it's just like sheer terror because you get 5 years and you're like, I'm not the same person that started this. But that's also a great, that actually helps you find like what's the true north of this story. What you're looking for is a story that like the perfect platonic version of this, right? Like, God bless you if you get it. But it's that idea, that we say about, like, how is it that we still read Shakespeare, and one of the signs I feel like when something feels like it's like, okay, I might be onto something, is when 5 years later I'm like, oh, that's just like this thing, even though I originally was prompted by that thing, and it's kind of trying to find those just experiences of people, like in the case of this other people sort of being shunted off into the margins, sort of being dispossessed, being exiled, it's a very common historical phenomenon, but it's also a experiential phenomenon, feeling marginalized, feeling like you're, so those kinds of things, because you don't want things to date you, and I think that there's, again, that idea that, because I think of transcendentalism and Faulkner and all this sort of stuff, there's like, whatever the politics of the historical facts of the day are, the human heart still experiences those things in a way that is fairly perennial, or universal. But yeah, that's something you have to always be thinking about, I don't want to be too topical, because then 10 months later it'll be like something else, that it'll date.
Firstly, thank you for the reading. I'm sure the image of a pebble being roiled by the Atlantic resonated with everyone. You chose an island, which obviously creates a geographical constraint.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It opens up opportunities, but also creates a perimeter.
So I did, well, one thing that, just because the pebble, and one of my favorite descriptions of this area of our world is John Cheever called it the nutritious Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, I just love that. So that was one of the things I was kind of looking for. When I stumbled upon this, I was just thinking about the Civil War and Reconstruction, post-Civil War Reconstruction. I thought there must be racially integrated communities. People get together. If they're left, if they're left to their own devices, people lay claim to each other. And so this is how sophisticated it was. I literally Googled like racially integrated communities after the Civil War, and then they just started scrolling. And as a intuitive writer, I was like, oh dear Lord, give me a sign, And this place, Malaga Island, which is, I can't remember who I was talking to earlier. It's near Phippsburg, Maine, which is near Topsham and Brunswick and Bowdoin. But that came up, and so I thought, Maine. I've been writing about Maine. I know Maine because I'm always looking for. One of the reasons I set all my stuff like in New England or near where I'm from is partly because I'm provincial and go to hell if you don't like it. But another part is that I have the seasons and the atmosphere and the light and everything at my fingertips. I don't have to go, oh, would there be chicory in Phoenix on Thursday? You know what I mean? Like I know when the chicory's up. That kind. So because I want to have all that stuff at my fingertips so that I can be thinking about character. Always thinking about character. What am I talking about? I can't. So there was that one of the families that was evicted from the island was committed to a place called the Maine School for the Insane. I think it was called the Maine School for the Feeble-Minded. Imagine the delights that await. And that was actually a place where one of the characters in Tinkers was going to be my first novel. So there's two like Maine. That and then to me the third one was an island because I was talking to somebody earlier, like to me islands are just catnip especially for stories because I immediately thought, oh, if it's on an island and it's people from from African heritage and Irish and Scottish, it's like Noah's Ark. It's like Melville's Pequod. It's like the Tempest. It's like the island and the Tempest, and so I immediately was like, I can put all that stuff in there, and started thinking about that. And I thought, oh, what if you were on Noah's Ark but you couldn't get off the Ark? Just that instantly that was like, I don't know, but that sounds like I could chew on it for a few years, and it's again just sifting and but there's something about the island, and something about an island kind of puts it just poetically speaking. It kind of makes things mythological a little bit or legendary, like so. It doesn't have to quite, because if it was set in Cincinnati, I was from Cincinnati and that didn't happen, and that happens anyways. But it kind of gives you a little bit of poetic and aesthetic distance to kind of make it slightly. There's a character in the novel named Rabbit, and I thought of her as literally being like one of the little fairies that's in The Tempest. And she kind of walks through this other novel. And she's like, "What are you all doing?" And then she leaves it. And so I thought you could do that on an island. You could have different realisms, different versions of realism, kind of crossing each other on So I don't know if that answers the question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, something magical about it, kind of.
I feel like that's a really nice place to end, although we could talk all night.
Oh, we're just under sail.
I got a quick one. What's the name of your band?
Yes.
I wouldn't wish it. We were called Coldwater Flat, which is an English term an English term for apartment with no running hot water, and we were not great. But we were a power trio. Early '90s power trio. I played lead drums, and we were associated with a record label and a studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts that had lots of really good bands. So we got to tour all around North America and Europe a whole bunch of times with bands like Dinosaur Jr. and Juliana Hatfield and Belly and Tanya Donnelly. So it was really, really fun.
That sounds like a good time.
It was fun. It was fun. It was not for me now, but yeah, it was fun and. Well, whatever. It was a lot of that stuff still comes back. I remember being in the band. I remember what it was like to try to make a record. But it was, it's the same kind of thing. Very different. It's a lot quieter being a writer, which is good because I'm deaf from being in the band. But yeah, it was really, really being a drummer in a rock band and being a writer. Kind of they scratch the same itch. You know, it's that impulse to
Yeah.
put stuff into the world.
Except